You're a good-looking group to see, and although we have entered into more of a sacrament setting, I would be remiss if we didn't have another round of applause for Jenna and Stephanie. That was beautiful. Thank you very much. I always get a little worried when I get asked to speak at these things because they usually do read a bio. And although everything is true in there, I don't like to listen to myself or things said about myself. Not too long ago, I was asked to be a backup speaker for Thurl Bailey. Can you imagine that? You're thinking, sure, Thurl Bailey's coming, and it's just me that shows up to it. So it was for a youth event in Logan. And so I got a call from a young man named Paul, and he said, Brother Maxfield, you know, you're the backup speaker to Thurl Bailey. And I said, you don't have to, keep bringing that up. And so he said, we'd like for you to, write something for us so that we can have a bio for you. I said, no problem. So I wrote a couple quick lines that said who I was, something about my family, and sent it on over. About a week later, I get another call from him. He says, Brother Maxfield. I said, yeah. He said, if you don't say cool things about yourself, nobody's going to come to this event. And I said, okay, so I'll take another crack at it. So I did. So I wrote a little bit more and sent it on to him, and thought we were good and all was going to be well. Then about another week later, I get another call from Paul, and I pick up the phone. I says, hey, how you doing? You're very persistent. And he said, Brother Maxfield? I said, yes. He said, is Sister Maxfield home? I said, yes, she's absolutely home. And so I passed along the phone, hopeful that people would come out to the event. We are grateful to be back in Rexford. Sister Jennifer and I met here. It's a tremendous experience. Matter of fact, let me just tell you just a little bit how we met. As I returned from my mission, I was a football player. She was a cheerleader here. And I was in my room, and I'd found out that my roommate was the Elders Quorum president. So I put a word in his ear to see if he couldn't talk to the bishop to see if I could be Jennifer Weiser, at that time's home teacher. And that worked out. Brethren, I want to tell you, I've never taken a priesthood assignment more serious than that one. And I was very diligent as a home teacher, and I need to work on that today so that I could be as diligent as I was then. You've learned so much at this conference about discovering your passions and about using social media to tell your stories and how to network with professionals. In today's business world, these are very important skills. Networking is essential for success. You'll find opportunities to network all around you. Previous to becoming the CIO for the church, I was the Chief Operating Officer for SunGuard Data Systems, which is a multi-billion-dollar company with a worldwide presence. I'd get the privilege of going to Forbes and Fox and being the spokesman for SunGuard, and I really enjoyed going and speaking about the various trends and what our plans were for the future. How I landed the job of the Chief Operating Officer for the Wealth Management Division for SunGuard might be very interesting to you, and it was a networking experience for me. One year, SunGuard decided to host a Spanish-speaking luncheon. The CEO of SunGuard was Chilean. And so I received a call, and somebody that knew me said, Blaine, I know that you went on a mission, and I think you speak Spanish, right? I said, yeah, I went to Guatemala, and I do speak Spanish. And he said, you got to go to this luncheon. So I said, well, okay, I'll go to the luncheon. And I thought it was going to look something like this, with large numbers of people. And I went into it, and it was more like 3 tables full of people right in the front. And I looked quite a bit different than everybody else in the room. And so as I walked in, the CEO of SunGuard came up to me. His name was Chris Conde. And he said, I think you're lost, and what's your name? Well, I thought a little bit about telling him my name or not, but I said, if I am lost, I'm sorry, but I thought this was a Spanish-speaking luncheon. He says, it is. Are you a Spanish speaker? And I says, well, I served a mission for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and I am a Spanish speaker. He said, well, I'm not sure if I believe you or not, but I'm going to sit you right next to me, and we're going to find out. So I had an opportunity then to sit right next to the CEO of SunGuard, and he tested my Spanish for the next hour and a half. And I think I did just okay, but just enough. I don't know what else I could have done for the rest of my career. Anything successful at SunGuard, I think, was past him. That one networking experience that I attribute to my missionary service and the privilege that I was to serve that mission and to learn to speak Spanish meant more to my success and anything that was accomplished at SunGuard than anything else that I'd ever done. Matter of fact, it meant so much to me that we've stayed in contact, and so much to him that I know that it's important to him, a little bit more about our gospel, because a couple weeks ago I got a message from him that said this: Blaine, I understand your oldest daughter's a missionary in Chile, Santiago. My parents still live there. Do you think it would be okay if they invited her over for dinner? I'm guessing it would be just fine, I said. I'm sure that they would love to go over and see her, and the wonderful experiences that can come from sharing the gospel and be a part of it. Look for opportunities to network for others and advance your career wherever you are. You need to, brothers and sisters, take ownership of your career. No one else is going to do it for you. If you think you're going to get a golden ticket, you're wrong. You have to move. You have to work. You have to assume. You can't assume somebody's going to make it happen for you. You need to go make it happen. Take ownership of your career, your future, and your responsibilities. You're going to have to earn your way. By the sweat of your brow is not an outdated statement. Try new things. Fail. Try again. Don't give up. Keep going. I would be really sad if I wasn't here on the Ricks campus or BYU Idaho campus and didn't share a couple of football experiences. And I'm going to have to tell them a little bit about my experiences, however, at Stanford. We were playing is there any USC fans here, by the way? Maybe I shouldn't ask that in a sacrament meeting setting. We'll invite you to go, young man. We can't have any USC graduates here. I'm just kidding. So we were playing USC in a football game. And as a part of this event, I was the center, and the person that I was going to be blocking, which is right across the ball from me, was the nose guard. And this was a man named Darrell Russell, who ended up being the second player selected in the NFL draft. He was a tremendous player, and so the whole week I was very, very much worried about having to block Darrell Russell. And so I was so worried that I started to weaken myself. I just assumed that I couldn't do it. Have you ever done that before? This job's too big. This career is too big. This major is too much. And you start psyching yourself out or weakening yourself, and you can't do it. And so we get to the game, and I was convinced I could not block him. So we went up a few times, and I snapped the ball, and I blocked him, and came back to the huddle, and blocked him, and came back to the huddle. And then he started screaming at us. You wonder what football players say to each other when you see them kind of talking? He started screaming, and we were in the huddle like this with all my teammates around me, and I was standing right in the front. And he was just about 7 yards away, and he started screaming this: "You can't block me, 56. You can't block me, 56. Well, I noticed that all my teammates started to check their numbers to make sure that they weren't 56. Well, there was one of us that didn't look down because I knew my number was 56. So I didn't need to look down to see, and he was right. I wasn't blocking him, and he kept it up, and he kept screaming it, almost like Goliath as I'm looking at him, and he's screaming, "You can't block me, 56. As the game went, we kept going and kept going and kept going, and we stuck to the plan that we had. And by about the third quarter, I realized, you know what, I could block him. And as a matter of fact, I probably could have blocked him from the beginning of the game until the end of the game had I not weakened myself, had I not just assumed that I couldn't do it. There's always going to be opposition and people and the adversary telling you that you can't accomplish something or overcome huge obstacles. We get very paralyzed when we sit and wonder what it is that we should be doing and weaken ourselves to not continue to move forward. Before we moved to South Jordan, where we live now, we lived in San Diego. Is anybody here from San Diego? Wonderful, right? We enjoyed our time there, and we had a couple guys in our ward that were smoke jumpers. Does anybody know what a smoke jumper does? These are the guys that jump out of the airplanes and they'll put out the wildfires. I mean, this is a really cool job that they had. And they tell about these experiences as it goes, where they said there was this very complex fire that took place. And so they all came together, the various battalions, and they told them, when you land, we want you to get on your radio and call in, and the dispatcher will tell you exactly where to go, okay? So they jump off of this plane, and they land, and they get on, trying to get back to the dispatch, and they get no signal back. So they sit there, and they say, we'll wait about 15 minutes and see what happens, right? So 15 minutes comes and goes. They try again, nothing. So they said, okay, well, let's give it a little bit longer. So they give it about an hour, try it, nothing happens. So they decide to eat their lunch. Try it again, nothing happens. So they decided to just rest on their packs for a little while. They waited there, brothers and sisters, for 6 hours. Waited there. So at the end of that 6-hour period, some of the other battalions started coming back. Even though there were a half dozen paths in front of them that they could have chosen to go down, right? The other battalions start coming back and they say, where were you? We actually could have really used your help. And the chief of it that didn't move for those 6 hours said, well, you heard. We weren't supposed to move until we could get through the dispatch and they could tell us exactly where to go. And so the other crew chief says, hand me your radio. He hands it to him, and he walks 50 yards to the right, calls into dispatch, crystal clear. Walks 50 yards the other way, calls into the dispatch, crystal clear. So they just happened to be standing in a dead spot. Even though their experience had taught them they could have picked any of these half dozen paths to go down, and they would have received that correction. Brothers and sisters, don't be paralyzed by indecision. You have serious amounts of paths. You're in the decade of decision, many of you, as you go out to determine what it is heaven would have you do and you would do. You'll find in your life that as you're moving, this is where the course correction starts to come. It comes very rare when you're sitting there wondering about yourself, but it happens quite often when you forget about yourself and look outside of yourself and look to help others. These are where these personal answers will come to you. Don't be paralyzed if you find yourself in a dead spot. You keep moving, and course correction will come. This was never made more evident to me than on or around the events that took place in the most horrific terrorist attack that's ever taken place in the U.S. soil, in 9/11. Right before September 11th, 2001, my family and I moved to San Diego. And we had just purchased a business there. It was a software company from a Nobel Prize winner, Harry Markowitz. We built some software packages called Frontier Analytics that is the foundation for a 401k plan today. So it was a very exciting thing that we were doing there in San Diego. We loved it. The business we had big plans for, and we needed it to grow. And historically, they had never sent anybody out to do any selling. And so I, as the president, came in and said, we are now going to send people out and start to sell our solution. So the first day that we sent people out to sell the solution was to New York, and we put them on a plane on September the 10th, 2001. And off they went. Now, you all can remember exactly where you were on September 11th, 2001. Each of you can. Whether you were small or not, you can stop and remember just the feeling and where you were when that took place. When we woke up in San Diego 3 hours behind the events, we were already well under the horrible things that were taking place in New York. And all those people that I'd sent, well, I assume I'd sent them to die. And we tried frantically to find them. As you can imagine, communications weren't great, and we couldn't get anything through. We had people in the Twin Towers, and later in the day, I finally got a message from somebody that said, we're out. And I texted back, and I said, tell me about it. And he says, we've been here hundreds of times before. We'd hired these salespeople that had been there other places. He said, I just felt like I needed to keep moving. You might remember some were told to move, some were told to stop. There was a lot of confusion. He felt like he just needed to keep moving. And the more he moved, the more clear it came to him what it was that he should be doing. Brothers and sisters, as we keep moving in our jobs and in our lives, we will not only discover which direction we're supposed to be going, but you will find that the Lord will provide inspiration for your life as you act, rather than being acted upon. One of the great blessings of attending a church school like this wonderful facility here at BYU, Idaho, is the principles and doctrines that you learn here as a part of the gospel will carry over into business life and help you to be successful there too. In the business world today, there are many temptations and enticements that would have you stray from the gospel path. Dishonesty, greed, unethical business practices will surround wherever you go. It is difficult to live your life and keep the standards in a business environment when others are continuing to challenge you all the time. And it doesn't seem you'll be successful if you don't follow those unethical practices. Remember, this is a false way of thinking. You can be a successful business person and still be a member of this church. When I took my job with SunGard, the environment was bad. From everything that you could potentially think of, it was just not a great environment to be in. A mentor of mine was President Samuelson, Elder Samuelson, and I was down at Brigham Young for another event in Provo and had an opportunity to stop by his office and visit with him a little bit and ask him for a little bit of advice. Now, I went in and I poured my heart out and said, what would I do? Everybody's wanting me to do all these things, and I'm having to hold the line, and what would your suggestion be? And he looked at me for a minute and he said, Blaine, my only advice is this. Every day, you need to protect your integrity. He said, have a nice day, and off he went to his meeting. Every day, you need to protect your integrity. Well, I'm going to tell you about my drive home. Cell phone call, called my wife and said, you got to be kidding me. This was it? Every day I've got to protect my integrity? I waited for all this time to visit with President Samuelson, and this is what he told me? Protect your integrity? But as time went, I realized how important this was. And brothers and sisters, you are going to find that when you start to protect your integrity, the way that your Father in heaven would have you protect your integrity in the work setting and in your life, those others around you, they'll start to protect your integrity for you. I realized that the more I protected my integrity, the people around me would protect my integrity as well. They knew my standards, and they will help you if you continue to live those that you are around. I saw this firsthand, several cases, but I'd like to share a story where I saw it very prevalent in my life. I was in India for SunGard on a trip, received a call from another one of my peers at SunGard, and they said, Blaine, we are about ready to close the largest deal that we've ever done in China. We were really trying to grow our business in Asia. And they said, you've got to get to China from India, so get on the first plane and get there. I says, okay. He says, you know how business is done in Asia, right? I says, well, I do, but tell me what you're saying here. He says, well, it's not going to happen in a boardroom, right? It's going to happen at our smoke break, because there's going to be a time in the meeting where you and the executive, the CEO of this trust bank, is going to go and meet together. And that's where it will happen. And it's going to happen later that night at the various locations that I just didn't feel like I ought to attend. I said to him, you got the wrong guy, friend. This is not what I'm going to do. He says, oh, don't worry about it. We've got this covered for you. All you have to do is you have to tell them that you're allergic to smoke and you're allergic to alcohol, and you'll be just fine. That's your answer. I said, that's your answer? And then he said, gotta go. So there I was pondering on the entire flight from India to China as it was what I was actually going to do. Well, I get to the bank. All the formalities happen, and it's very exciting. We sit down and we start the meeting. Everything seems to be progressing about this largest deal that SunGard ever had done in Asia. And I felt privileged at one hand to be the one that was there to help close it, but felt compelled to remember that I was a priesthood man. And as I sat there, sure enough, the CEO stood up, and my translator was with me, and said, Blaine, now's the time that he'd like to go smoke with you. We've got the executive room ready. What do you want me to tell him? I said, you tell him I'm a Mormon. You tell him I don't smoke. All I heard from the translator was, blah, 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 Mormon, blah, 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 blah. Off he went. I sat in this room all by myself thinking, certainly I could say anything I wanted on my last day of work. I sat there just assuming that I was going to have to pack it up and go. President comes back in from the bank and says, we're going to postpone the rest of our meetings. We will still meet you at lunch, however. I thought, oh boy, here we go. Well, I'm fired anyway. I might as well go get a free lunch out of this, right? So we went to a lunch setting. It was a very fancy place. If you've ever been to Asia or done business there, it's a very formal event. There was a big table, just like you have seen, where you spin around the meals as they come to you. And there were different colored napkins for those that were presiding, so to speak, at the meeting. And my color was different. And so I got there, everybody was waiting, and I saw one of the assistants just pouring through the menu. And so I sat down, and everybody else sat down, and we started talking back and forth, and it was a very interesting discussion. The translator said, as the food started coming out, "Aren't you so excited?" And I says, "What are you talking about?" He says, "Well, look at all the food. It's all vegetables." I'm like, "Okay." He says, "Yeah, they've done some research on your church. They know you don't eat meat. So it's all vegetables here. How do you feel about that?" I'm like, "Well, look at me. I eat meat. Are you kidding me?" So we started laughing about that. And then the CEO let on that he spoke English a little bit better than he actually had. And we started talking back and forth, within my mind remembering my obligation to be a priesthood man as a part of this discussion, right? So on and on we went about what was going on. And finally he said, "You know what, Blaine? I'm down with a lot of the things that go on in your church, by the way. I'm all for families. Good with that. I'm all for how much you care for others. I saw the humanitarian work that goes on. Not good with not smoking, and I'm not good with not drinking." I said, "Okay, we'll work on that. It'll be all right, right?" He says, "But let me tell you what I'm excited about." I says, "What is it?" He says, "This whole 10-wife thing, I could really get behind that." Well, I knew I had an obligation there, didn't I? Whether it was my last day at work or not, I'm telling you, you can keep your integrity and you protect it every day. And I took some time to explain to them what our church was about. The things that they were wrong about, the things that they were right about, the divinely appointed roles and responsibilities that we all have, and the truthfulness of the restored gospel. The next day we went in, still not sure what was going on, wondering if the translator had called back to the mothership to tell them all what had taken place. Perhaps the greatest meeting I've ever been in my life was to walk into now the boardroom, and a can of Sprite was sitting in front of everybody's place at the table. And they came up to me and said, "Blaine, we're not members of your church." Once again, I don't represent the church other than a baptized member of it. I worked for a different place. "We're not members of your church. However, it would be our pleasure to do business with you. Would that be all right?" I said, "Yeah, I think it'd be okay." In those same trips, brothers and sisters, I would go and I would look for opportunities to buy shirts and suits, especially in Asia. You can get really nice ones done there. And as we went, and I would go to the same place almost every time, and it looked like a really small place, a place that you wouldn't think would do good work, but they would. And so I stood in line like everybody else, and maybe you know how this goes, but what ends up happening is you go stand in the corner somewhere, and somebody will be there, and they'll take your measurements, and they'll call it out to somebody else, and they write it in this book, and they make you a suit, and they make you shirts, and they're custom, and they're very nice. And so almost every time I'd go there, I'd try to get some made. So the first time I went, something strange happened. As I was waiting in line for everybody to do the sizing, I started to see a group of people gathering around. I couldn't exactly understand why. Till it was my turn, and I went and stood in the corner, and I heard the person say, da-da-da-da, and I didn't understand what he did, but he said, "Ah." So I went like this and put my arm out, and they did the measurement. Once he did the measurement, he called it over, da-da-da-da, and the person wrote it down. And the crowd that would gathered around every time he'd do that would do this. Da-da-da-da. Oh. Then they do my leg measurement. Oh. Now, this wasn't very good for my self-esteem, brothers and sisters, as you can imagine, as it was all gathered around, and my entire dimensions were being shared with everybody in the room. I started to feel a little bit self-conscious. You might remember the vision of the Tree of Life. The vision included a great and spacious building, which we learn later represents the pride and wisdom of the world. Nephi describes the people of the world pointing and ridiculing, and yet the righteous people pressing forward, catching hold of this iron rod, continually holding fast until they came to the tree of life. How were they able to resist the scoffs and scorn of the world? Nephi tells us in 1 Nephi 8:33, we heeded them not. Brothers and sisters, as you strive to live the gospel in the workplace, each of you will hear the oohs and see the pointing fingers of the world. Heed them not. The adversary will whisper in your ear that a little greed or a bit of dishonesty are a part of the business world. He'll try to convince you that it is just a part of doing business and that it is how companies succeed. Brothers and sisters, heed them not. You are different. You have the gospel of Jesus Christ. Don't compromise your integrity to meet the standards of anyone else. Every day, you do need to protect your integrity. As you enter into the business world, into new careers, into new life paths, be willing to stand up and stand out as a disciple of Jesus Christ and as a member of his church. As you do, you will find happiness and success in your professional life as well as your personal life. I share these things with you in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.